Unexplained versus unexplainable. Atheists are going wild. Let's take a look at what one had to say. Just because something is unexplained doesn't mean it's unexplainable. You can't possibly believe we're finished discovering answers to scientific questions, do you? Also, the answer for every mystery that has ever been solved in the history of mankind has been a natural one. Everyone. God ain't required. Now, can you demonstrate your specific God exists using the scientific method? Now, I will answer his claim. You packed a lot of claims into a small space. Let me answer each one with logic and basic science. 1. Unexplained versus unexplainable. You say, just because something is unexplained doesn't mean it's unexplainable. I agree. That cuts both ways. It does not follow that science will explain it one day is true. It only means we do not know yet. Saying future science will prove a natural answer is not science. It is faith in naturalism. You do not have data from the future. You have a belief about the future. So your first point does not support naturalism. It only says, we do not know everything. Christians agree with that. 2. We're not done discovering does not prove naturalism. You ask, you can't possibly believe we're finished discovering answers, do you? No serious Christian thinks we are finished. That is a straw man. But look at the logic, premise. We are still learning. Conclusion. Therefore, all answers will be natural, and God is not required. That conclusion does not follow. It does not come from any experiment. It is a philosophical assumption you place on top of science. Science says, we observe, test, and model. Naturalism says, whatever the answer is, it will be godless. Those are not the same thing. 3. Every solved mystery had a natural answer. Flawed argument. You say, every mystery that has ever been solved has been a natural one. Even if that were true, it does not prove that every mystery must have a natural answer. That argument has several problems. 1. Bad induction. You are taking a small sample of local questions and trying to reach a global rule. So far, the puzzles we solved in physics and chemistry had natural descriptions. Therefore, the origin of the universe, life, mind, morality, and logic itself must have natural answers too. That jump is not science. It is a guess about things that are not even in the same category. 2. Category cheat. You define natural as everything that exists or can be measured. Then you say, every answer is natural. That is just a word game. You built your conclusion into your definition. 3. Scope error. The mysteries you are talking about are within the universe. Why this disease happens, how this chemical reacts, and why this star behaves a certain way. The big questions are about the existence of the universe, the origin of its laws, the beginning of time, the origin of the first living cell, the source of information in DNA, the ground of moral law, and the reality of consciousness. We explained lightning without Zeus does not touch those questions. 4. Natural descriptions are not full explanations. When science gives a natural account, it describes a process. Gravity describes how masses attract. It does not explain why the universe is lawful in the first place. Chemistry describes how atoms bond. It does not explain why there is something rather than nothing. Biology describes how traits spread. It does not explain where the first coded information and self-replicating system came from. You can always ask one more question. Why do these laws exist at all? Why are they ordered, stable, and described by math? Why is there a rational mind that matches a rational universe? Naturalism answers, they just are. That is not science. That is a bare assertion. 5. God ain't required. Assertion, not evidence. You say God isn't required. Required for what? For a description of local processes in nature? Often not. For the existence of nature, its laws, its fine-tuning, the reality of moral duty, and reason? That is a different level. You cannot move from I can model a process with equations to no mind lies behind reality. That is like saying, I know how the engine runs, so there was no engineer. Knowing the mechanism does not erase the need for a maker. 6. Can you use the scientific method to prove God? You ask, can you demonstrate your specific God exists using the scientific method? Now we get to the core confusion. The scientific method is built for repeatable events, controlled experiments, physical measurements in the present. God, by definition, is not a physical object in space and time. The ground of the laws you use in your experiments, a personal agent, not a molecule to weigh in a beaker. So your demand is like saying, use a bathroom scale to measure the truth of a math theorem. Use a metal detector to find the number 3. You are using the wrong tool for the question. We still use evidence, but not only lab-style experiments. We use historical reasoning, philosophical logic, cumulative inference to the best explanation from many fields. That is how we reason about the existence of other minds, moral truths, murder is wrong, the reality of the past, the laws of logic and math. You do not prove any of those by the narrow lab method, yet you trust them every day. 7. A rational case for God. Brief. Here is how a rational case for God looks. 1. The universe began to exist and is finely tuned for life. That calls for a cause beyond space, time, and matter, with great intelligence. 2. Life rests on digital information and complex machinery in cells. We know only minds produce coded information. 3. Moral obligations are absolute. Torturing babies for fun is wrong, is not just a personal taste. That calls for a moral lawgiver above human opinion. 4. Human reason, consciousness, and free will are real. Pure matter, following blind laws, does not explain rational, self-aware agents who can know the truth. Each line points toward a personal, rational, moral creator. That matches the God of Scripture far better than brute, mindless nature. 8. Who is actually taking things on faith? You accuse believers of God of the gaps, but your own stance is nature of the gaps. No matter what we find, you assume a natural cause before you look. You rule out God by definition, not by evidence. That is not neutral. That is a closed belief system. I am happy to say, here is where science can speak, here is where philosophy speaks, and here is where revelation speaks. You collapse all of that into nature and then call it science. That is not science. That is naturalism dressed up in a lab coat. Thanks for watching or reading. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment to support this channel.